chosen one of the hottest days in the week to make this video, so this is going to be a quick one. So I started this channel by explaining that I wanted to talk about how I get through some of the difficult times as a leader, as a manager in the NHS. So all week I have had what many people will describe as difficult conversations. This is the topic that I really want to discuss today because we set ourselves up to fail immediately when we label a conversation as a difficult conversation. Just going to quickly interrupt here for a second. I've noticed by having a look on my YouTube video kind of watches and audience interaction, etc. Many of you watching these videos aren't actually subscribed, so it doesn't take you a lot, but it really helps me out. So if you're not subscribed already, hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like if you liked it. It really kind of helps me out making sure that I'm delivering good quality videos for you. I'll let you go on. So I want to kick off by explaining my thought process around difficult conversations. I do not believe that there is such a thing as a difficult conversation. That is definitely a mindset that I've had to put myself in, especially this week after having many conversations that can be challenging. But by referring to it as a difficult conversation, you have subconsciously already prepared your body for battle. So it's that kind of fight or flight conundrum. And you know that when your body gears up for a battle or for that fight or flight situation, then your body is flooding itself with adrenaline along with many other hormones that aren't always that beneficial to us. And we have to make sure that we are preparing our body adequately for when we do need to fight. A conversation should never be a fight, especially as a professional, especially as somebody that is deployed into a scenario to have a conversation with somebody about a particular issue. Many of the conversations I've had this week have been incredibly sensitive of nature. They have been quite delicate matters. And we have definitely found ways around preparing ourselves as a team to have some of those challenging conversations. The other thing that you do when you call a conversation or you prepare yourself for a difficult conversation is that you already then have put your mind on a negative track. And with that, you're preparing your body for this scenario in which you feel that you need to back yourself up with facts and prepare your conversation rigorously enough that it doesn't have any holes in, and you want to make sure that you've got all of your facts straight and that you're prepared to kind of have this conversation. What that does is it clogs your mind up. Already before you go into a conversation, you have a pre-prepared dialogue of how you expect that conversation to go. Now, unless you're a clairvoyant, nobody knows how conversations are going to go, but what you can do is that you can position questions and comments and your sentences around ideas that you want to explore. Therefore, you can almost control how the conversation flows. However, remember that there is no way on this planet that you are going to have control of the conversation wholly. Mainly, conversations are happening at least between two people or more, and therefore what's going through in your mind is possibly already going through the other person's mind as well. So when it comes to having a difficult conversation, stop. First things first, stop and think why. Why am I going to find this conversation difficult? Why is it going to be a challenge? It's possibly because it houses one or many of the following. It could be a conversation that you don't want to have. Perhaps you have avoided having that conversation for some time, but you don't have that chance anymore, and the conversation is about to happen. It could also be that it involves somebody that's important to you, or perhaps somebody in a position of influence, and therefore you go into it with apprehension of how it's going to flow. Or it might be that you already expect the conversation to be uncomfortable for you due to perhaps it being a sensitive or intricate issue. All of these are important conversations. And that's the point at which I want to move towards, is we don't think about conversations being difficult. We definitely think of conversations being important. Otherwise, it's probably not worth having. So to shift the conversation from difficult to important, use the word important and not the word difficult. Simply by phrasing it in conversations, in your own mind, in emails, in notes, phrase it as an important conversation, and the conversation then becomes important to you and not difficult or fraught with complexities. But an important conversation is therefore important to have. Another important thing to do is to ask yourself why the conversation is important to have now. Why can it not wait till next week or next month or the next time you get a chance to meet up with that individual? Almost give the conversation a priority, and therefore you're grounding it already in, okay, this is an important conversation I need to have. I would also say to think about the other person. We often find ourselves spending a lot of time preparing ourselves for conversations, and you're preparing yourself, but often we forget to think about the other person in that conversation or people, and think about what might be important for them and why. If I am preparing myself to have an important conversation, sometimes I do a little exercise, and it could be helpful for you, so I'll share it with you. I take a blank piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and on the left-hand side of that paper, I list down all the good things that could come from this conversation, from having the conversation. And then I think about actions that I can bring about to make those good things happen, and I write those down at the right-hand column next to each of the good points. And then I read the list as many times as I possibly can, without it becoming a prepared script, before the meeting, before that conversation happens, to then remind myself the good stuff that I want to come out of that conversation. If you're going into a conversation to not have any good actions come of it, then again, take yourself back to the question of, why is this conversation important to have now? I pause there. So I have my list prepared, it's there, and that is what I use to prepare myself for that conversation. During the conversation, you have to listen to the other person. We know that you will go into this conversation having a preconceived outcome from having that chat, but it is really important to listen to the other person. I made my last video on the model of advocacy inquiry, and it's a little bit of an extension of that. So let yourself really listen to what that person's saying. Focus on what they're saying instead of formulating that conversation within your mind. Going by how I reacted or how my internal reactions were going through the latest conversation I had this week was kind of those negative emotions coming up. So it could be anger, it could be upset, it could be frustration. Whenever I felt those emotions, I paused. So if I was in a conversation, if I was halfway through a sentence, I would pause and then carry the conversation on. I do that to make sure that I don't end up doing any weird non-verbals towards the person, which could allude to them finding out my internal emotion, but also to make sure that the conversation continues in a helpful, healthy way. Again, if you have been asked a question or you've asked a question in that conversation and the response you've got was negative or strong in any way, pause before you respond for exactly the same reasons. You want to neutralize the sentence before it comes out of your mouth. We all know that we react in very odd ways during stressful times, times of upset or anger, and we've all been caught out by our emotions, and you end up, having that all infamous phrase of, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that, I just got angry. Having conversations with employees or colleagues, you just don't go down that route. It's not worth it. And then through the conversation, subconsciously refer to the list. If you're on a Zoom call, you might want to keep that list there, but any kind of sensitive, important conversations really need to be had face to face. But given the beautiful current climate of the pandemic, that might not always be necessary. However, the benefit of that is that you can have a list outside of that Zoom screen where you can refer to. You might want to practice being subtle about kind of just reading off a list, but again, it's just there to kind of prompt you about the good stuff that you wanted or you had an idea of that you wanted to get out of that conversation, and building in those actions to make sure that you can, wherever possible, make it a positive outcome for you both. It's getting really hot in here now, so I'm going to need to wrap this up. What I've talked about in this video nicely links itself to a book called called The Secret. It's an oldish book now. It was brought out in 2005, 2006 by Byrne, and the book is all about kind of the law of attraction. So it's kind of like the mindset of what you think about, you can bring about, and it's about if you're thinking negative thoughts, then you might be kind of attracting that negative energy, whereas if you're thinking positive thoughts, you're more likely to generate positive energy. So when it comes to these conversations, if you go into them with a negative mindset, it's possibly going to have a negative outcome. Whereas if you go into it with that positive mindset, then it's more likely to result in those good actions that you wanted by putting them down on that list. So that's it. Hopefully it's given you some thoughts and ideas about how you might want to next enter a conversation that you possibly find difficult, but shifting it towards that important conversation and keeping your mind in that positive, if you can, mode. Thanks guys, and I'll see you next time.